And we're live. I'm here with Dr. Satan. How you doing, Dr. Satan?
Hello, Dave. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
Uh, are you a doctor in any way, shape, or form? Is that just a cute nickname?
That's just a cute nickname.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay, no problem. I understand. So, the way I do my show, I ask the guests to go back and talk about their experiences with God and religion. And in your case, I guess we should talk about Satan, if you believe in him or whatever. And sort of walk us through the whole faith and philosophy journey. How did you get to be the man you are today? If you identify as a man, I assume you identify as a man, but you never know in
I do. I do.
2023, right?
You shouldn't assume my gender, but I do.
Okay, so walk us through the journey, just touching on the highlights. And you probably didn't know I'm going to do this, so it's going to be very spontaneous, and stuff's going to come from your subconscious about your childhood. If it's too dark, don't share it. But I guess you are anonymous, so go for it. Tell us whatever you want to tell us. Just walk us through, sticking to the world of ideas, philosophy, and religion.
All right, all right. Well, so I was introduced to religion, I think, at about 6 or 7. Uh, just dropped into church one day, everyone standing around all quiet, and it really didn't make much sense to me. There were a grown man was floundering on the ground like a fish, making funny noises, and then we got separated after the initial service. The kids went into the kids' church, and the adults stayed in the adults one. And they tried. Well, they started explaining how just the general Christian viewpoint, and it sat with me perfectly fine for a couple of years. You could consider me a Christian child for a while, but when I got to around 11 and 12, I met a bad influence, and I sort of looked up to him, and he was a heck of a lot smarter to me than I was. And he started pointing out the fundamental parts of Christianity that just don't make logical sense, like God creating Adam and Eve, but not giving them the knowledge of good and evil, yet expecting them to know it was bad to disobey him. Uh, so that so that friend led me down some dark paths, admittedly, but probably the biggest influence on my deconversion, so to speak. And then, well, I'm not sure how else I can. That's all I've really got to say. The more I've learned over time, the less logical the Christian faith seems to me.
Okay. So sorry, I'm multitasking. I'm just responding to some questions. My friends in the live chat are kind of baffled about why I have Dr. Satan, because most of my guests are, Catholic or Protestant or some kind of nice guy
I
atheist or
can
whatever.
understand.
Just give me 1 second. I'm really bad at multitasking, so I'm just typing my response here. A
Not
guest
a
hooked
problem.
me up. Yeah. So, can you just, share as much as you want or as little as you want? But I'm always curious biographically about siblings, parents, grandparents. Were any of them religious fanatics, or were any of them hardcore atheists or Satanists or anything like that? Do you have any? Are you willing to share anything about the different faiths and philosophies of your people closest to you?
Yeah, so my sisters, I have two twin sisters and an older brother. Um, we'd never, up until we got dragged to church for the first time, we'd never been introduced to it. Our dad, our father he was a single father, he raised us all, just decided we'll go to church one day. And so, yeah, that happened for a few years. And then I got old enough to decide that I don't have to go, and I stopped. Occasionally, I'd go to youth group just to hang out with the other kids my age, but I left. I'd already left the faith by that point.
And
Just hanging
today,
around.
any of your family members today, do they find their way into any kind of religion or Buddhism or Judaism or anything?
My father's still Christian,
Okay.
and as far as I'm aware, none of my siblings are.
Okay. Okay. And did you get married and have kids and the whole thing, or?
Me? No, not yet. No, no, I'm still far too young for that.
Oh, are you? How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?
I'm only 30.
That's not that young. I was married at 25.
No, sorry. I meant to say I'm only 20.
Yeah, you don't sound 20, but you could be 20. Who knows? Anyway. So, I was an atheistic Satanist before my conversion in 2009. So, I'm assuming
Oh,
I'm a,
if I could just interrupt you quickly,
yeah.
I'm not a Satanist. I
Oh,
just like the name because it antagonizes people. I
yeah.
don't dislike Christians, but there are some who just strike me as hypocritical.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
And, and so I like to argue with people, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the name Dr. Satan in the picture is kind of bait to see what a person is like. If they take one look at my name and then start getting rude, and I'll know, oh, that's how I'll act in response to them.
Oh, okay.
But the vast majority of Christians that I speak to don't give my name and picture a second thought when we engage in rational discussion. It's kind of just to draw out the ones that aren't really following their faith, so I can pick at them, you know.
Interesting. Do you have any online presence? Like, do you have a website or a channel, YouTube channel or a podcast or anything like that?
No, I frequent the videos for the AX for Atheist Experience. That's how I found your channel.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so you'll
Oh,
usually see me in there, either having a rational and peaceful discussion, or just abusing the Christian trolls that are mean to everybody. It's one of the two.
so, do you know my friend Nikola?
Yes, I don't like him very much. He's
Oh,
the reason. Oh, he's one of the people I'm talking about. He's gotten upset and be a little keyboard warrior like over our discussion, and he just refused to address my argument, which about causality.
okay. But he's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. But maybe, was this a text-based dialogue back and forth on text?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, don't worry about that. I mean, that's so easy to misjudge someone on there. If you spoke to him, you'd love him, I'm sure.
I'm sure, but
With voice. Like he's a nice guy. And anyway, whatever. Maybe you don't have good chemistry with each other, whatever. That's fine. But anyway, he's a sweet guy, and he's the one that introduced me to you. I think he hooked us up.
yeah, it was his suggestion that I come on and talk.
Cool,
He
cool.
asked me if I are you a keyboard warrior or are you willing to talk and have a discussion on my friend's channel? And
Ah.
then he ignored my argument and just insinuated that I was a coward keyboard warrior because it didn't seem like I was going to agree to come and talk to you.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, but
okay,
you
okay.
see, he didn't wait for me to reply.
Okay.
It's the weekend, or the
Okay.
weekend that's just gone. So I was out partying, and he'd waited 9 hours or so, saw that I hadn't replied, and decided to goad me. You're a
Yeah.
coward, just a keyboard warrior.
Yeah. So he's probably all excited. Like he really likes me and my podcast. So he's probably really excited. Like he wanted to get you on, and he was
I
goading
appreciate
you.
that,
Yeah.
but that isn't any reason to insult me.
Yeah.
I was busy.
I apologize on his behalf. Okay. He's a nice guy.
No,
Anyway,
no harm done.
anyway, maybe he came up against some argument that you made that he couldn't answer, and he wanted to direct you to me because he thought maybe I could. Like I'm no genius or whatever, but I have the podcast and I'm opinionated, so maybe he thinks that I can handle some of your philosophical questions or arguments or whatever. And I'm no expert. I'm just a dweeby guy who converted, and I'm in love with Christ and his church. But the bottom line with me and my podcast is I love and respect all human beings regardless of what their worldview is, and it's just nice
Me
to
too.
chat. It's nice to chat about ideas. And my friend is in the chat. He's noticing my shirt. It's actually an Orthodox shirt, and my friend is Orthodox now, so I just wanted to give a shout out to my friend Kieran Lisney. So let's get into some philosophy because it's been so long since I've had anyone on that's actually interested in talking about first things and causality and you know,
Yes, yes.
morality and all this sort of thing. I know you have something to say, so let's get into it. Whatever topics interest you most, let's dive right in.
I am ready and raring to discuss your reliance on reductio ad absurdum
Yeah.
in the video you had with atheist experience.
The first video?
Pardon me. So
With Matt Dillahunty or with the other boys?
no, with the nicer guy. I like Matt, but he can come across pretty strong, too strong in a lot of instances. So with the secular rarity and apostate prophet.
They were nice. I especially like apostate prophet. He seems like a sweetheart. He seems like a nice guy.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit rude for secular rarity to tell you off for interrupting and then proceed to interrupt you several times. That was just hypocrisy. Before we start, I want to mention that I want to try not to interrupt you, but I understand there are instances where it's necessary, because you also interrupted them a couple of times.
Yeah.
So if I do, I don't mean any offense.
No problem.
All right. Things that seem absurd or logical to us are based entirely on the knowledge that we have. So without the information, without the knowledge that objects drop when you fall to the ground. Sorry, when objects fall when you drop them. My bad. It's not logical to say that an invisible force acts upon them. Without the proof that particles can be in two positions at once, it wasn't logical to say that superposition is possible. And that same token, reductio ad absurdum, isn't really useful for anything beyond our universe. Like you're trying to use reductio absurdum is like saying my frame of reference here should apply to external systems when we have no reason to believe that it does. It's like saying in Egypt they use slaves, so they must use slaves in Fiji. It's some sort of fallacy, and I don't know what kind, but it's not really a useful tool to deduce things from beyond our internal system.
Can I interrupt? I don't remember what I said, so maybe remind me and, of course, my listeners, what was the argument that you think I made on the atheist experience?
Well,
just
that's
in a nutshell. In a nutshell.
You didn't end up actually making it. You said you were going to use reductio absurdum, and the two gentlemen were just like, you know what? We accept that there was a cause. How is it your God? And that's sort of the rest of the conversation went. So if you'd like to tell me your argument for that, I didn't actually get to hear it.
Oh, I remember now. Yeah, that was lame. That was really lame because, you know, the reason I phoned in, I wanted to present an argument. Now, I wish
they just accepted it and took all the fun away. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, unfortunately, you know, I don't know which of the many I can't even say it now. Reductio ad absurdum arguments I was going to make. But would you like to talk about the uncaused first cause, or because that's usually where I go with non-monotheists, is sort of the first step.
This is sort of what I'm talking about. If this uncaused cause is outside of our universe, it is functionally impossible for us to understand. There's no reason that anything beyond the universe should behave in a way which is logically consistent or sensible to us from within it. That's my thinking.
Okay. So what I would say to you is that you are either A or not A, and A is you're the source of your own existence. So if you're the source of your own existence, that's option A. Option B is not A. So option A is you are the source of your own existence, and option B is not A. So that's logically sound. Would you agree with that?
Yep.
The way I've set that up?
That's logically sound within our universe. I'll add the caveat.
Okay, so
we don't know that the laws of logic hold true beyond the universe. For all we know, the second law of thermodynamics. For all we know, energy can create itself. For all we know, things can happen for no reason beyond the universe. We don't have a frame of reference to make any sort of claims about that.
Yeah, but you exist, ostensibly you exist within this universe. So we don't need to talk about God or the supernatural or anything. We just need to talk about the manifest fact that you exist.
That's all well and good, but when you try and apply that to the existence itself, is when the issue. Sorry about that. Is when we have an issue. Yeah, I exist and something caused me to exist. But causality requires time, and time didn't exist.
Causality does not require time. I'm sorry to tell you, causality does not require time. All essentially ordered causality is atemporal necessarily. This is one of the most fundamental proofs of the existence of God, is the atemporality of causality. Because only accidental causality is temporal, and only accidentally ordered causes are temporal. True causality is atemporal, always.
I don't understand. How can an action have an effect if there is no time for the action to have taken place in, and no time for it to have affected a cause?
Well, there is time.
All the actions that you can think of.
It's a manifest. Oh, sorry, I'll let you finish.
All the actions that we can think of happen in time. I drop a rock. The rock is moving in time. My hand is moving in time, and then the rock hits the ground in time. I don't understand how you could have cause and effect if time didn't exist.
Well, have I denied that time exists? Have I denied that there's accidental causality and accidentally ordered causality? I don't deny that because it's manifestly obvious. It's self-evident that there is time, there are accidental causes, and there is accidentally ordered causality. That's manifest. Yeah, we can't deny that. We cannot deny that.
There are causes that happen by accident in time.
Well, it's a technical term. It's a very technical term. When I say accidental causality, what I'm speaking of is causality that is temporally mediated in time, and the mediation in time is what allows each and every essentially ordered series of causality to be populated with events and effects which come into being in time through accidental causality and accidentally ordered causality. For example, right now, your great-great-grandfather and your great-great-grandmother, the ones who produced your great-grandfather, they are not copulating. They are not in the process of causing your existence, right? That took time. So you're not dependent right now on that. It's a temporal thing. But if they didn't copulate, you wouldn't be here right now. So I'm not denying that you're here now. I'm not denying that there's accidentally ordered causality. What I am denying is that right now, your great-great-grandparents are copulating. That's not the case, because causality is always atemporal. But there are temporal effects to causality. That's what we call accidental causality and accidentally ordered causality. So you need to distinguish those three categories. And you need to be aware of how causality works in order to understand who and what God is, the uncaused first cause.
How can my grandparents be said to copulate if time doesn't exist?
Time does exist. I'm not denying that time exists. Time does exist.
I'm discussing I'm in reference to when time began existing. So up until time existed, how was time caused to exist without time?
It's a logical dependence, not a temporal dependence. So time, there is no before time. There's no temporal before. There's a logical prior. There's a logical prior, but there's no temporal prior.
I have no other way of making that clear.
Yeah, but
how can an action take place which causes time? If all the actions that we know about, nothing you can tell me doesn't require time. Everything within your and my frame of reference needs time
No,
to
no, no.
function.
I've just explained to you that we do not need accidental and accidentally ordered causality. We don't need it, but we have it. It's a manifest reality. We have to accept it. We have to
Could
accept
you
that we live
define
in time.
accidental causality for me?
I'm sorry?
Because could you define accidental causality and how, and
It's
just
non-temporal.
explain the
It's
distinction?
non-temporal. It's the non-temporal effects which populate the essentially ordered causality, which is true causality per se. Because to
Can
say
you give me one example of a non-temporal effect?
a non-temporal effect, no, I'm talking about a non-temporal causality. An essentially ordered causality is every single effect is a member of two orders: the temporal, which is the horizontal, which is the accidental, and the vertical, which is the atemporal. Now, the vertical is the essential one. That's what we call the essentially ordered series, but it's populated by, in our created world, it's populated in this temporal world by the accidental causality. It's like feeding in, populating the vertical. So the horizontal is feeding the vertical in this temporal world that we inhabit as creatures. God does not live in the same, he's not a creature, he's the creator of space-time, so he's not limited by space-time, and he doesn't depend on the temporal. He's the master of the temporal, he's the author of the temporal. So he is the atemporal efficient first cause, the uncaused first cause, in every essentially ordered sequence of causality. So any effect that you can point to is caused, and it is a member, that effect is a member of a series going right up to God each and every time. So whether it's a bullet breaking a glass window, or whether it's your parents copulating, or whether it's the poison entering into the lake, which is killing the fish, or whatever you want to point to in this world, it always is a member of that vertical, essentially ordered atemporal sequence of cause and effect, the first member of which is always God.
This is difficult for me to wrap my head around. So other than time itself, you aren't able to give me an example of a temporal cause.
Everything. There's only one atemporal cause, it's God. But because only God is outside of time. But he's
that isn't something you can demonstrate.
No, but
So you're saying we have causality here on one hand, all the stuff that we can prove. Atemporal causality is something that we can't. You just split causality into two.
No. You need to
kind of split causality into two different sections. One
dimensions,
which has reference in our existence, and then you're kind of just saying, well, that needs to have been caused by something. We'll call it God.
No. You're missing the point entirely. Just as your grandparents, when they copulated, that's in the past. It's not part of the essential, essentially ordered causality
that's temporal and causality. That's exists in our universe.
Yeah, but
what analogy can you give me that doesn't only refer to the creation of causality itself? Because it sounds like the only example you've got is, well, this is how I think time started.
No. Listen very carefully. It's not about the beginning of time. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. We can talk about right here, right now. When you have a thought and your lips move to express your thought through your microphone to me halfway around the world, that chain, each and every essentially ordered series of causality in that temporal, if you want to think about it in terms of frames, we go from frame 1 to frame 2 to frame 3 to frame 4, and we can hold up the film. We can hold up the film.
2 second, 3 second.
We can look at your life from conception to death as a series of frames. And yes,
Yeah,
of course,
that's the temporal spectrum.
when I see you walking towards the edge of the cliff, I can predict that, oh, he's in danger. He might fall off the edge of the cliff. And then we fast forward a few frames, and sure enough, you fell in or someone rescued you or whatever. We'll have to just go through the frame by frame to see what happens. But
That's a temporal.
there is a temporal aspect, obviously, to our temporal lives here. But you have to admit, if you're rational and logical, you have to admit that the things that happened in the past are not actively causing what's happening in the present. And the things in the future are not actively causing what's happening in the present. What's happening in the present is causing what's happening in the present. Now, a lot of the stuff that is the situation right now, as you're teetering on the precipice of the cliff that you're about to go over, headlong into the cliff, that the reason that you're there now is because of the previous step and the previous step before that and the step before that and the step before that. So there is an accidental causality. There is an accidental causality to falling off the cliff. But right now, as you begin to fall, right now in the moment, the cause is the weakness of the ledge of the cliff that you're standing on and the gravity and your mass and so on and so forth. And if we analyze that atemporal sequence of causality in the moment, we have to ignore all what you had for breakfast and what your parents did and your grandparents did. We have to ignore that. And we have to just look at right now, the snapshot right now in this, what's happening right now. Right now, what's happening is the ground can't support you and you're falling. That's what's happening right now. So that's why we have to ignore the past and the future. To say anything else is completely absurd and unscientific and unphilosophical. So we have to acknowledge the essentially ordered series of causality that is in every moment.
We take causality, time, out of that situation. I'm in the present. I am standing on a cliff. Nothing happens without time. If it weren't for the past, I wouldn't be on the cliff in the first place. And if it not for the future, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move forward from the present. I'm sorry, but it might be probably a lack of my understanding, but I just can't wrap my head around how causality, how things can happen without causality. We wouldn't be talking about the cliff.
We have both. We have the horizontal and the vertical. We have both. I'm not denying that we're temporal. God made us to be temporal creatures. But causality, properly speaking, per se causality is atemporal, always. Because to say otherwise is to say, well, the causes in the past are actively participating right now. Well, if that's the case, then they're not in the past. They're right now. So it's always
But right now is in time as well.
Right now is in time. It's informed by time, and it's part of that matrix with the vertical and the horizontal. And I'm not making this up. This is just Western philosophy 101. Go read about causality and read about the distinctions that are made and the subtle distinctions that are made. If you want a good overview, just read Blessed John Duns Scotus or something like that from the Middle Ages. They did a good job of digging into causality. You can find out all the subtle nuances and all this sort of thing. But just using common sense, we know that only in the now, only those causes that are present now are able to be qualified to be participants in any essentially ordered series of causality that's happening right now. Because the past and the future, the past is gone and the future is not yet. That's just the way causality works.
Yeah, so what I'm seeing is I'll at the end of our conversation, I'll ask you for that name again because I didn't quite catch it.
Sure.
But atemporal means existing or considered without relation to time. Do you have like a diagram of this horizontal and temporal?
I can send you diagrams. It's very easy. You can picture it in your mind's eye right now. Everything that is acting now is part of the essentially ordered series of causality. And everything in the past and in the future is connected to the present. On the horizontal dimension, it's connected to that vertical. It's connected through time, obviously. So like you were saying, if you are hanging over a precipice, like hanging over the pit of hell gaping to swallow you up, then, if time doesnn't advance, then great. You're not gonna fall. You're not gonna fall, but you're also not gonna experience anything else. It's like It's like not existing. It's like you're frozen
That's
in
my
time.
argument. Without time, there might as well be nothing.
Yeah. It's like you're dead. It's like you're dead without time. Because we are
nothing can happen without time.
Yeah, we're temporal creatures. So the fact that you're on thin ice and your fall is imminent, you're on thin ice, and you have to admit, using common sense, that life is dangerous. You can make good choices, you can make bad choices, and there are consequences of those choices. If you skate out onto thin ice, you are in danger. Why? Because we're temporal creatures, and cause and effect. And when that turning point is reached where it's too late, you're on thin ice, you can't escape, you're going to fall, you're going to die. That moment right there, there's a series of causality that is irreversible, where it's like everything is in place, you've crossed the line and you're going to fall, and that's the way it is. Now, if you want to pause time and never move forward, then it's like you don't even exist. But God didn't create creatures to be frozen in every given moment of time. God created time to flow from past to present to future. But when it comes to causality, the reason that you crossed the line into the danger zone and there's no going back is because at that moment in time, the ice cannot support your weight. That's the fact right now. It doesn't matter what you had for breakfast. It doesn't matter. Right now, the ice cannot support your weight right now.
How can that moment in time, me being on the ice that's about to break, not have to do in time? You directly referred to the opposite of the thing you're trying to explain.
Yeah, well, it's
you see, you're using time as an example to explain non-time. Without time, I'm not on the wall. I'm not on the cliff. Without time. Yes, I'm going to need to do some more research into this.
Yeah. It's very subtle. You're going to have to go away and think about it. And I know that you're capable of wrapping your head around it. I know you're capable.
I can't. It's just not making sense.
My friend Nikola says, "Hello, boys. I have to say, I respect the man that goes by Dr. Satan for coming on this podcast for a live dialogue. I take back any harsh words I said, and I ask for your apology." Or does he mean for your
apology?
Well, I don't know. I think he made a typo. I think maybe he made a typo. Maybe he means I ask your forgiveness. I don't know what he means. Did you say something nasty to him?
I did. Yeah, right after he started.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I don't want to get in between you two, but let's just kiss and make up.
Fair enough.
So when it comes to morality, let's move on to other topics because we have a lot of ground to cover, and I do have another guest coming on. When it comes to morality, I say that first of all, let's talk about free will, because if without free will, there's no possibility of having any responsibility whatsoever. So maybe we should talk about free will. Do you believe in free will?
Yeah, I don't see how free will is relevant to the concept of morality, though. Why?
Well, do you punish...
Whether or not I can choose to make decisions is irrelevant to whether or not actions will have positive or negative effects on.
Yeah, but if a rock rolls down...
If I were to have a robot, just a dumb, mindless kind of thing that does exactly as I tell it to, and I bash its head in with a rock, that's bad for the robot, right? If I give it better set of legs, then that's good. It'll be able to do whatever I tell it to better.
Yeah, we shouldn't...
I don't really see how free will is necessary for us to have the morality conversation.
Well, if a rock rolls down and kills a baby, you don't punish the rock because the rock is not sentient. The rock has no free will and no ability to reason freely. So we don't punish all the rocks that crush the little babies, right? So
understandable, but not everything has the same ability to reason or the same perspective for basing their logic, Yeah. That which is good for the lion is bad for the gazelle.
Yeah. My friend Nikola clarified. He said he was asking for your forgiveness. Okay, so that's a nice gesture.
Yeah, I forgive him.
Nice. Very nice. So when it comes to morality and free will, if we're not choosing freely, we are like a machine. We are like that rock, just obeying the laws of nature, and we are not to be held to account. Now, from your perspective, you would probably say, well, first of all, clarify, you're not sure. Are you agnostic about free will? You don't think it matters, or do you have a firm position one way or the other?
Well, we have free will. I'm not trying to question that. I was just
Okay.
confused as to how the concept of free will is necessary for the morality.
Have you ever heard
But
of not guilty by reason of insanity? Have you ever heard that?
yes,
Yes.
yes.
So there you go. That explains everything.
No, that's fair. That's fair. With respect to morality, though, so the crazy person injuring somebody, right?
Or a child before the age of reason.
Anyway. Yeah. Someone who is incapable of making these decisions soundly, whether or not they understand what they're doing, is irrelevant to whether or not the action that they've done is good or bad for them. So yeah, it's bad for the victim, undeniably so. But like a child kicks a rock, hits somebody. That's bad from the perspective of whoever got hit. It's neither here or there from the perspective of the baby. Or from your perspective, say the same thing. You threw a rock at someone. It's a bad action for them. It could lead to negative connotations for you if you're caught. But that's an if. And that's the same thing in the animal kingdom. So a monkey, right, runs up and it sneaks and it steals a banana off its friend. In the short term, that's a positive outcome for the monkey. If it gets caught, that's bad for the monkey. From my argument about morality is that it's objective from different perspectives. So from the perspective of the individual, the perspective of the species, and the society. From society's perspective, objectively bad to let us go around killing each other. It has a detrimental effect on society. From the perspective of the species, it is bad. No, it's good. It sounds horrible for us from our individual perspective, but it is objectively good for what do they call it? The alpha gorilla who deposes the old gorilla will kill that gorilla's children. Terrible. Sounds terrible to us. Objectively, the better male passing on his genes and rubbing out the old ones is better for the species than letting the weaker male's genes propagate.
Yeah, well,
Do you understand where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I certainly do.
It's not
I
quite
certainly do.
simple as there is no objective value that can balance the needs of all things.
This is the dominant worldview today with all the evolution nonsense and moral relativism and all this. You're in the majority, sadly, it seems, today, and I don't think you're going to get a lot of people contradicting you, except for perhaps those Christians who have had the time to think about morality and these sorts of things on a deeper level. But basically, it's infiltrating our education system. Your way of thinking is dominating, in the mainstream media and in the education system, sadly.
I'd like to add the caveat: society doesn't run on the version of morality that we are talking about, because outside perspectives is irrelevant to what's good to me. What you think about what I do has no bearing on whether or not the things that I do are good or bad for me. Ethics is the closest thing we have to balancing the requirements of certain creatures. So like the Palestinians want this water source, and so do the Israel. Well, if one of them gets it and the other doesn't, that's going to be negative for whoever doesn't get it. But it will be positive for the ones who do. Ethics is like you need to share. That minimizes the damage to both and maximizes the benefit to both people. Morality is an archaic term, in my opinion. Ethics is based on what is and isn't good for people and tries to balance the perspectives of others.
Yeah, I could think of some good examples, but I don't want to give them voice.
There's never going to be a perfect system. But it's as close as we can get. Or ethics is anyway.
Yeah, the argument that I like to use with atheists or non-monotheists is that if you have a standard of truth or goodness or morality or anything else, if you have a standard which is objective, eternal, absolute, and immutable, then welcome to monotheism, because that's my God. That standard is my God. But if you don't, if you reject that there's any standard that's objective, eternal, absolute, and immutable, if you reject that standard as a fantasy or that it doesn't exist, then your judgments that you make are undermined by that rejection. Do you see it? Do you see what I'm saying?
No.
Okay. Okay. So when you make a moral judgment, when you point fingers at the pedophile priests, okay, are you judging by a standard which is absolute, objective, immutable, and eternal, or is your standard here today, gone tomorrow, subjective, relativist, and all the rest? Because there's a big difference. There's a big difference.
My standard is, from the perspective of society, it's bad for society to let people get away with pedophilia.
Objectively,
it's as simple as that. Objectively bad for
eternal,
society.
And that standard, that objective standard, is it eternal, immutable?
Unfortunately, and I am extremely remiss to admit this, but from that pedophile's individual perspective, if he can get away with it, he's got a free, sick, gross act of pleasure. If he doesn't get away with it, that's objectively bad for him. It's the same as the monkey stealing. If he doesn't get caught, he's golden. If he does get caught, he is distrusted. He has life will be harder for him from then on out.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
Yeah,
from my subjective opinion, but objectively bad for society to allow that.
Right, but that
as a society, we have to punish it.
Your system, your standard of ethics or morality or whatever you want to call it, goodness, standard of goodness, which applies differently for different sets of subsets, right? As you've said, is that absolute, eternal, unchanging, and objective?
No, because the society is never going to be the same always. The needs of an individual, a species, and a society are ever changing. It can't always be the same. And an example that it's not is how your God changed a whole heap of rules in the Bible. You go and put all the belligerent children to death. Take them to the village elders to have them stoned to death in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, Jesus is like, he was without sin cast out for a stone. Well, being omniscient, God would have known that Jesus had said that in the past. So you have a system which is not absolute because it has changed from the Old Testament to the New. It's not eternal. Your system is not eternal.
The standard to which I submit is eternal, absolute, objective, and immutable.
Well, then explain how it was once considered okay to stone the belligerent children to death, and it is now no longer.
Because
as the
God-man said, you have heard it said, but I say unto you, right? So the God-man is man, but he's also God, and he said, it's like his teaching on divorce. What did Moses say about divorce? What did Moses say about divorce? Is it good or bad?
We're not talking about that. We're talking about whether or not. So now, sorry, I get a little mixed up. The standard back then was that it was okay to kill the belligerent children.
Well, I prefer to use that. We could use that example, but it's better to use the example of divorce, which is evil, objectively, eternally, and absolutely. Divorce is objectively, absolutely eternal, but Moses made a concession to the weakness of
I'd prefer that we use the belligerent children example.
Yeah, but Jesus didn't...
Why is it now okay? Why is it now not okay?
For the same reason, the reason I want to stick with divorce is because Jesus explicitly in the Bible tells us why there's an apparent change. He tells us why there's an apparent change, and it's the same thing that we can apply to all of the Old Testament stuff. Okay, but we have a concrete example that we can examine.
You've just acknowledged that it changed.
Yeah.
Ergo,
Jesus
the
Christ acknowledged
standard
that. The God-man Jesus
the
Christ
standard
acknowledges.
can't be eternal if it's changed.
No, there's a difference between man-made concessions and God. When the God-man came, he said, what did Moses teach about divorce? And then Jesus corrected Moses and said, Moses only did that as a concession to your weakness. So now you understand the principle of why in the Old Testament there are things that are man-made traditions. And when the God-man came, he said, that was just a concession to your weakness. So now you have an explanation for all
But you're
the
telling
so-called
me that it was man who
inconsistencies.
decided that it was okay to stone children to death,
I'm sorry?
and God just allowed that to be put in His Bible. So what you're saying is, if we were to apply your divorce example, Moses said no divorce, right?
No,
And
Moses said we could have divorce, and Jesus said that was a concession.
how was this? You don't make concessions in eternal, unchanging systems of morality.
To just clarify.
Is that something that God allowed? Back when Moses said you could have divorces, what did God think of that?
Yeah, God allowed that concession. It was not.
Yeah, and then
it was not.
At some point, God-man said no.
Yeah, he clarified that that was not the absolute, objective, eternal, immutable standard of morality, and here it is. This is what Jesus did when he came to earth. He clarified. He said that was a concession. This was a concession. That was just wrong. That was evil men. That was carnal Jews, not spiritual Jews. He went through and sorted it out.
Why did he let people do that? Why does he need to let us do anything?
Well, I mean, the same
We're
reason.
expected to follow all these other things. So why didn't he just say toe the line? You don't get to divorce now, and you don't get to divorce ever. It changed.
God,
whether you call it a concession or not is irrelevant. The system has changed.
No, well, I mean, it's like
consistent throughout. It's a concession. It's just a justification for why it hasn't been consistent throughout.
Well, if you meet 10 religious people that belong to the same faith, you're going to find inconsistencies, and God allows that because God loves us. He's very gentle, and he gave us free will, and he's very accommodating, and he wants to bring us slowly closer to the truth. And if you read the Old Testament and the New, you'll see a progression and a development of doctrine and understanding of the people of God coming closer and closer to the truth. And when the God-man came,
that makes no sense to me. Rather, why not just have the standard from the start and hold people to it, rather than let people spend hundreds of years getting used to the old system and then expecting them to change when Jesus shows up? That's not logically sound to me. If you want something to work one way, you keep at it. You don't say, well, you guys can go around and
I'm just picturing you now. I'm picturing you now as God Almighty and being very firm, using a very firm hand with the stiff-necked Jews, and I'm just trying to picture how that would have played out. I'm pretty sure.
He was pretty firm-handed with a whole heap of other people, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure that God is wiser than you are, and that he has a reason for allowing evil of all kinds.
Answer. If I could get you to not refer to that ever again,
what's that?
That'd be in our conversation. It doesn't make sense to us, but God's smart. God's smarter than you. We can't make sense of it. That's a cop-out.
No, but it's a manifest. No, but listen. It's a manifest reality that Jesus Christ came down to earth and he corrected Moses and the teachings of Moses.
You can't tell me why what I've said is wrong, though.
What?
I don't want to hear that God thinks what I've said is wrong because he's smarter than me. That's a cop-out answer. Tell me why I'm wrong. Don't tell me that God knows, but you don't.
So you're not a parent, right?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I'm not a parent either, but the idea of parenting to me will involve a certain amount of flexibility, concessions being made, and then education, and you bring your child more and more into adulthood as time goes by. That's just how I see human nature and the development of human nature and the development of salvation history. And people are backsliding today. We have the fullness of the truth today. People are still backsliding.
To your parenthood,
yeah,
kind of thing. You have the same standards as a parent. right from the start. Right, it's just their expectations about how well they're going to hold up to the standards. That's what changes. As they grow older, you can expect them to obey the rules more than you could before. The rules are still the same. Their capacity for understanding them is what's changed. So, let's say if I was a parent, I am not just going to let my kids run around and beat people up and then be like, when they're 18, no, you got to stop that now.
Yeah.
I'll tell them that it's bad to beat people up from the start. Whether or not they understand it is irrelevant. I have to find a way to teach them not to. All right? It's not the same. Saying, oh, you guys can have a divorce now. I'll make a concession with you infant children. You're allowed to divorce now because you don't bloody know any better. 1,000 years, sorry, I try not to swear. 1,000 years from now, I'm going to expect better from you. Do you know?
Yeah. Well, I make a lot of concessions.
The standard has changed. The rules have changed. How you apply them is irrelevant.
Yeah, I make a lot of concessions to the people that are closest to me, who are not perfect, and they know that I'm Catholic and what my the moral teachings of the church and so on and so forth. But I'm not gonna be heavy-handed with it, and especially if they don't claim to belong to the Catholic Church, right? So like with you, I won't hold you to a Catholic standard because you're not Catholic, right? But I can work with you and I can support you and I can bring you in. And that's what God was doing with these pagan peoples, was bringing them into monotheism, into, Judaism and into Christianity. Huh?
Is that what happened? He did with the Canaanites, was it?
Well, the Canaanites were not Jewish. They were not monotheists.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but he didn't. They were pagans.
Yeah.
He definitely did not try to bring them in.
Well, you can read about the conversion of certain key figures in the Old Testament that came in from paganism. That's basically the story of the Old Testament, right? Is bringing people out of paganism into. That's the whole point of the chosen people, the Jews, is to bring people back to God. Because from our perspective, I know you don't believe this, but I believe that the whole universe is like less than 10,000 years old, and that Adam and Eve were created perfect in the perfect Garden of Eden, and they fell, and then we have chaos and sin and all the corruption and death and disease and everything that stems from original sin and actual sin. And then God chooses the Jews to be the priesthood people that are going to bring everyone back to God and morality and these sorts of things. So I see it as a work in progress.
People end up killing so many.
Well, there's lots of evil. There's lots of evil documented in the Old Testament, and much of it's done in the name of God, right? And then the God-man comes along. The God-man comes along and says, "I disavow this. I disavow that." You know what I mean? Clarifies.
Well, I don't see the point in making the distinction between God and God-man.
Well,
if God-man is man plus God, the God you're talking about.
It's just
God who is also a man.
It's an incarnation. It's an incarnation of the eternal God, where God Almighty takes on flesh.
2 different people?
Yeah, there are three persons. There are three persons. Yeah, there are three persons. There are three persons with one nature, the divine nature. There's three persons with one nature, and everything they do everything they do ad extra is done in unity with the three. They're of one will and one nature.
Why do they disagree on so many things?
They don't disagree at all. There's zero disagreement among the members of the Trinity. Zero disagreement. Where the disagreement is the stiff-necked Jews with their understanding of God in the Old Testament, and then when God comes in the flesh, he corrects them, he teaches them.
What impression did God give them in the Old Testament which got them to include that it was okay to murder the children who are belligerent with stones?
Well, he may have... God may have...
It was a prophet who said that.
Yeah.
It was either Elijah or Elisha or one of the two.
Yeah.
And they get all their juju wisdom knowledge from God.
Yeah.
Why is God man coming along and saying, no, you can't do that now? Because that tells me that the two people disagree. That they're not the same people. The God and man God have differing opinions.
Well,
The
I would say,
standard has changed.
yeah.
That was good, that was acceptable then, it is not acceptable now.
Yeah, I don't have a
The
problem with
standard is
that.
not
I don't
eternal.
have any problem with that. Just like with Adam and Eve and their children, you know, siblings having sex, closely related siblings having sex. I don't have a problem with that. There are two standards. One, you know, in the early days when they were just everyone was closely related, and then today when you don't have to marry someone who's closely related. I don't have a problem with that. The context determining what's licit and what's moral. I don't have a problem with that. Same thing with the violence in the Old Testament. It may well have been God's positive will, like, yeah, destroy these people, all the men, women, and children, and their livestock and whatever. That may have been the positive will of God. I don't know. The church doesn't tell me if that was the positive will of God or if that was, you know, something else. Just something that's permitted, the permissive will of God, the permissive will of God.
So, hang on. Can anyone, if I were to just say I lived back then, could I just pick up a pen, falsify something that God says, tell it to lots of people, and it end up in his inerrant book?
Yeah, for sure. There are false prophets
So
everywhere.
why
There are
do
many
you
false
believe that
prophets.
the Bible is
There are many
inerrant?
false prophets, many false prophets in the Bible. Many false prophets in the Bible.
Which ones? Could you name them? Was Eliza
No,
Elisha one?
no. The true prophets.
So then
The true prophets are true
your
prophets.
argument just defeated itself, because if Eliza and Elisha were a true prophet, then they got that standard from God, and then God man comes along and says that's no longer the standard.
No, but I just told
changed.
you. I just told you the prophet of prophets. Who's the greatest prophet in the Old Testament? It's Moses, and he made a concession. He made a concession to these wild, stiff-necked pagan peoples for divorce and for God knows what else. So there's no gotcha here. There's no prophet greater than Moses, but he was making concessions to the stiff-necked pagan Jews.
But he did it at God's. So you're telling me that it was Moses' idea and God didn't sign off on it?
God has positive will and he has a permissive will.
You're
God has
running into a wall here.
No, but listen.
Where
It's
did
very.
Moses get that information
It's
from?
very simple. It's very simple. No need to get all excited. God has a positive will and a permissive will. I don't know which one is the case when it comes to Moses permitting divorce. I really don't know. And I'm not worried about it. It might have been God's positive will. Hey, make a concession. It might have been his permissive will where Moses did it and God allowed it. I don't know. It's not, I don't lose any sleep over that.
If God's allowing it and he's not saying you can't do it, that's functionally identical to him doing it himself.
Well, it's parenting.
He
it's
knew
good
Moses
parenting.
was going to put it into the thing. He talks to Moses frequently. If he didn't want Moses to make that concession, he'd tell Moses not to. So it's just you're just saying Moses when you really mean God.
It's
God
very
doing that
It's
stuff.
very, very good parenting. If you look at the story from the Old Testament to the New, and you look at how did we get from A to B, and which one's better, the primitive pagan nonsense with the sex and violence, or Christianity that we have when the God-man came and set the record straight and you know, made fewer concessions, because there's still concessions being made. I hope you realize that. God is still making concessions to you right now. Like he could just strike you dead, put you in hell. He's making concessions to you. He's giving you time to repent and whatever. It's the same thing. It's always the same thing. It's good parenting. It's very, very gentle, good parenting. And occasionally, God is harsh, yes. And God allows harsh things, yes.
Good parenting.
It's good
to
parenting.
Allow
it's very
your
good
children
parenting.
to have a different standard growing up, and then expect them to adhere to a totally different one once they're adults. You should have the same standard the whole time.
Yeah, it's the same standard for sure.
It's bad for you to hit children while you're a child. It'll still be bad for you to hit adults when you're an adult. You don't say you're a child so you can hit other children. You have to find some way to get through that it's bad to hit children. You don't make a concession because the intellectual capacity of your child is different, or reduced compared to what it would be when it's an adult. You have the same standard. You've always got the same.
Yeah.
Their ability to live up to that is what changes.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. Now, in terms of how did the messy Old Testament peoples get from point A to point B? I see that as symptomatic of good parenting because they went from sex and violence and whatever else, chaos, to being the Holy Roman Catholic Church, right? And so for you to sit back on your armchair and say, oh, God did it wrong, he shouldn't have made concessions or shouldn't have allowed concessions, I disagree.
I'm not talking
I
about the
disagree.
pagan.
I
I'm
disagree.
talking about how his. Okay, let me keep going. Keep going. Sorry.
That was my only point. It's like we can take the bird's eye view, and it's like I see good parenting, you see bad parenting, and that may be why you're not a monotheist because you're angry at God or you don't like the way God's doing things. Maybe you think you could do better. I don't think so. But this is manifest reality. What we're examining.
I'd like to interrupt you now. You think it's better to let the child use the wrong standard for the duration of its childhood, and then expect it to,
no, well, the law
conform to the line once it's an adult? Because that's bad parenting.
Listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. Listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. The law of God is in the heart of every human being. This trumps all of your superficial analysis of the messiness of the pagan peoples in the Old Testament. The law of God, allow me to continue speaking. The law of God is in our heart. And the law that Moses brought down from the mountain twice, because he smashed it the first time because of the orgy of his brother Aaron, right? Making the golden calf because they came out of Egypt, was pagan, they got corrupted.
I didn't realize it was an orgy. Cool.
Yeah, it was an orgy. So you need to understand that law that was taken down from the mountain, it's God-given, yes, but it's secondary. It's a supplement to the God that's in the heart. You have God in your heart. You have the law of God in your heart. You know right from wrong. That's why you're trying to teach me about morality, and you are indignant with the outrages against justice and truth and goodness and everything else that you see in the Old Testament. I am outraged too. We share that. There's no difference between us. The only difference is I submit to my loving Father in heaven, and you're angry with him, and you think he could have done things better. That's the only difference.
Yeah, that is true. I will accept that. I don't agree that with his method of parenting. I firmly believe that a standard should always be the same.
And I just told you it's in our heart. The standard's in our heart. God put the commandments in our heart. You have this. You are living proof because you have the commandments of God in your heart. You know right from wrong. You know right from wrong. You know right from wrong.
If he lets Moses or Elisha tell people that it's okay to stone belligerent children to death, what's the point of writing it in our hearts if he's going to send a prophet a couple thousand years later to say, hey, ignore that, beat the children to death with rocks, and then another man-god prophet to come and say, hey, look, no, you shouldn't beat the men to death with the children to death with rocks. That's an ever-changing system.
Yes, I know that the truth does not change. It's an immutable truth. The moral standards does not change. Now, looking back on the messiness of the Old Testament, I find it bewildering, just as bewildering as you do. But there's a difference between your perspective and mine. It's that I know the standard doesn't change. I know that the management of rebellious, stiff-necked people is difficult, and I don't think I could manage that people. But looking at the manifest fact that he did manage to pull it together, God did manage in salvation history, that's my perspective. He did manage to bring this savage people to Christ. And even then, when the Messiah came, the Jewish Messiah came, a lot of the Jews, the carnal Jews, rejected the Messiah. Imagine that. So it's not like he brought 100% perfection to humanity, fallen humanity, because a lot of people still reject God and Jesus Christ. And you reject God, and God still loves you, and he's still working with you.
Not just yours, all of them.
All of them what?
All of the gods that man
There's only one
up.
God. There's only one God. There's only one God. This is the first
Tell that to the
efficient
other
cause. Yeah, I do. Every chance I get.
Tell that to the other religions which predate yours by thousands of years.
I do tell them. I've had them on. I've had Hindus on, Jews, Muslims, everybody. I've had them on my show.
So you're saying, as your argument, that the Greeks, who were around 2,500 years before the Bible was written, before the Israelites descended from the Canaanites who descended from the Babylonians, Greece was worshipping 20 or so gods that are all somehow your one?
Well, they're either they are infinite in every pure perfection, in which case they are not many but one, or they differ from God in some way and they're not gods at all. They're demons, right? So
I,
yeah. So anyway, I want
the
to
idea of your God
yeah.
is young compared to many, many other gods. So I don't see why you have a basis to say that these gods, which occurred thousands of years before anybody even dreamt or anybody even started telling stories about my gods, before the people of my God were ever separated from the original civilization,
Well,
those gods are my God too.
you have a false view
the
of history. You have a false view of history where you think that monotheism came in later. Monotheism is the first and only religion. It's the first and only religion.
No,
Yeah.
the Israelites, the Bible was written in the Old Testament in between 1200 BC to what, like 700, or is it closer to 80, like 300 BC?
Well, we have
Greeks had their
intertestamental.
gods in 4000 BC, a long time before yours. The Aztecs and the Mayans, same difference, maybe a little bit more than 4000, 5000, 6000 BC. They had polytheism. They had multiple gods.
We can't have this conversation because I believe that the whole universe is about 7,000 years old, and that God created perfect paradise with Adam and Eve. They're the only two humans.
You also believe that the Greeks are younger than the Greeks, the Aztecs, and the Mayans are younger than Israel? Is that a belief you hold or not?
I don't hold the belief because I don't have a timeline. I don't have a timeline of civilizations. I don't have a timeline. I don't have any clue about the timeline of civilizations. Zero clue. Zero clue.
Well, so 10,000 years, right?
Yeah. Less than 10,000.
Well,
I would say put around 7,000.
None of the people I've mentioned existed more than 10,000 years ago. So the timeline, by your logic, still should be intact. The Greeks are still older than the Israelites by 2,500 years. And the Mayans are older than them by 1,000.
But Cain is older than any of them. And Cain.
Well, so it's claimed in the Bible, in your Bible.
Yeah, we have perfect paradise.
Give me an extra biblical source.
Yeah.
For Cain.
I don't care, but
what? So
I don't care. I don't care about the sort of secular appraisal of history and dating by meteorites that came from other planets and these sorts of things. I don't care about this.
I'm talking about historically proven records.
Right. But there might
Christians say that Jesus is historically proven and accurate. There are multiple accounts that attest to him, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, you have to accept the fact that there are multiple accounts that attest to Greece being much older than Israel.
Yeah.
Upon what basis do you have to deny that?
Well, I haven't denied it. I'm just saying I don't know the timeline, but I know that Cain is older than Greece.
Well, you're in front of a computer. Well, who's Cain?
Cain was the second-born son of Adam and Eve, and he killed Abel.
Yeah, do you have any extra biblical sources for him?
I'm not impressed by secular, godless.
I'm not impressed by unverifiable testimony that a person existed.
Yeah, but I'm talking to you about faith-based beliefs. Because I believe in the uncaused first cause, I'm a monotheist, and we're
comparing apples and oranges. I'm talking about reality, and you're saying, no, your reality is wrong because of my belief.
Yeah,
the verifiable history, which you, I'm certain, which you would try and use to validate the efficacy of, the existence of Jesus. You then turn around and say that's not good enough to beat my belief when it comes to something else. When it comes to Greece being older, that method isn't good enough because it contradicts with your unverifiable belief.
What you need to understand is that if you don't get your metaphysics right, like the uncaused first cause, then you're going to buy into you're just an ape and moral relativism, subjectivism, millions of years, and evolution and all the rest. You're going to buy into that because your metaphysics is not grounded in the truth of the uncaused first cause. I have the uncaused first cause, and therefore I'm a monotheist, and I can look at the stories of the different monotheists with the promise of the Jewish Messiah.
Is one of your beliefs.
I'm sorry?
There's no way to verify that Cain actually existed.
It's a faith. That's a faith-based belief. That's a faith-based belief. It's a faith-based belief, and I mean, we shouldn't even be talking about it, because step one for you is to use reason to come to monotheism by acknowledging the uncaused first cause. But we do have limited time here. I have another guest coming on soon. But I would like to move away from my faith-based beliefs, not because I don't love them, but because it's absolutely a waste of time to talk to a non-monotheist about things that they're never going to have any handhold on. So I'd like to talk about metaphysics. You know, we've talked about causality. We've talked about a little bit about free will. And we've talked about morality. Is there any other area that we could touch on, that we should touch on? And I will have you back again, because I do enjoy talking with you. And I hate to rush you, but I have to do some things with my life in between the interviews. I have to go take care of my wife here. So we have to rush a little bit. It's been an hour and 10 minutes, and I've got to do some stuff, and then I got my other guest coming on. So are there any other topics you find interesting that are not related to Christian faith-based beliefs like Adam and Eve and all that sort of stuff, or the Bible? Because that's completely, we shouldn't even be talking about that. We should be talking about philosophy, first things, and things that we can are not faith-based at all, just reason, pure reason.
No, I wanted to talk a little about Adam and Eve. But if that's not acceptable,
a different angle. You have a different angle to come at it from.
Well, I just goes in with what I was saying right at the beginning. How I don't think it's logical. So, God made Adam and Eve without the knowledge of good and evil. Correct? He locked that in a fruit. then he made the act of gaining that knowledge a crime.
No.
Which he expected them to understand was bad/evil, despite the fact that he intentionally withheld that knowledge from them. My analogy for this would be a parent, right? Knows that their infant child always reaches out to try and touch the jug, or is going to reach out and try and touch the jug despite lacking the knowledge that it'll get burnt. Parent, knowing both that it will touch the jug, or try to, and that it will get burnt, stands there and watches as the child reaches out and burns itself on the jug, and then he disowns the child. No, you get out of my house, your children and children, forever and ever. And then every now and again, the parent calls up, tells the child he loves them. That's the analogy I like to use.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, but you do realize I was atheist for 25 years, and I was an atheistic Satanist. So none of this maligning of God is a surprise to me, and it's all very cute and charming. But once you realize that the uncaused first cause is the infinite source.
No. You've jumped straight away from addressing that entirely.
Can you allow me to answer the question? Okay, once you realize that the uncaused first cause is infinite in every pure perfection, which means every perfection it's better to have than not to have, then you're not going to worry that God's a big bad bully in the sky. You're not going to worry about that. Okay, I thought, I had misunderstandings about who and what God was while I was an atheist. Obviously, once I realized who and what God is, I'm not worried anymore that he might be nasty or evil or a bully or stupid or silly. I'm not at all. Okay, all right. Once you become a monotheist, listen to me very carefully. Once you become a monotheist, you're going to laugh at how you misrepresented God. It's a joke. It's a sad joke. He's good. He's all good. He's all good.
I think it's a sad joke. You're essentially saying I can't explain to you why your analogy was inept.
I can explain it to you. I can explain it to you. They knew the difference between right. They knew the difference between right and wrong. They knew the difference. My answer is they knew the difference between right and wrong. They knew they were disobeying God, and they knew.
How did they know that if God made them without the knowledge of good and evil?
Of course they knew. Of course they knew.
What do you mean? Of course
The
they knew.
knowledge.
How?
The knowledge.
How did they know? He
They
didn't
were
give them that
endowed
knowledge.
with. They were endowed with free will and reason, like the rest of us. Okay, they were way more advanced and intelligent than you or I. And they had.
Okay, yeah, they've got the reason and they've got the free will,
So
but they don't have the knowledge.
your interpretation of what this fruit is in the Garden of Eden is wrong. That's the answer.
So
that solves the
what is it then?
problem, because it's not that they, like what Satan said. What Satan said is, he doesn't want you to be like him or to become like gods or whatever Satan said to him, right? That was a lie. The truth is that they wanted to grasp at, just like Satan, they wanted to grasp at godliness in an unhealthy way where they would be the judge of what is good. This is called subjectivism, relativism, like all the things that you are preaching. That's what the fruit was. That's what the fruit was deciding for themselves what is good and what is evil. They already knew in their heart, because God placed the law in their heart, and this is what it teaches in our scriptures, Old and New Testament alike, that we know the difference between good and evil. Just like you, an atheist, you know the difference between good and evil. And of course, if you were right in your interpretation of the Garden of Eden, I would not buy the story, the Christian story or the Jewish story. I would not buy it, or even the Muslim story. Do you notice that all the monotheists agree with Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve? Why? Because they know who and what God is, and they worship that and adore that God as only God should be worshipped and adored. So it all comes back to the uncaused first cause. If you're a non-monotheist, you really have to go away and think about causality. And it's actually a dogma of the Catholic Church that causality is one of the best ways to come to a knowledge of God. So I recommend you go away and do that. Did you have any other non-biblical topics you wanted to touch on briefly before I let you go?
No, I think that'll do us for today.
Okay, so I'll send you some links to Blessed John Duns Scotus, so you can figure out how essentially ordered series of causality differ from the horizontal accidental ones, and you'll have to look into that. I was
searching for that, for some sort of philosophy which explained atemporal causality, but it wasn't able, we were talking about it, but I wasn't able to find anything pertaining to both causality and atemporal at the same time.
I'll send you links. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I hope I didn't jump in and interrupt you too many times. But
no, we both did a fair share of that. All right, let's not split here.
Because we're passionate. We're passionate about the truth. We love the truth, right?
I respect your passion.
Right back at you, my brother. So take good care, and please do come back again. Okay, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
All righty, you have a nice day, Dave.
You too. God bless. Bye.
Bye.
Right back at you, my brother. So take good